Far East is a vast and picturesque region of Russia that still has many secrets and mysteries. It has always attracted the attention of travelers and explorers and has special significance in Russian history. This region combines the culture of Central and Far Eastern Russia, which is reflected in many ways: architecture, traditions, and mentality. This unique and incredibly beautiful place of our homeland, the Lena Pillars, the volcanoes of Kamchatka, Lake Mainitz, the Amur River, Avacha Bay, the Commander Islands, and much more have made the Far East famous throughout the world. But most importantly, it is Russian land. The Russian presence in this then unexplored region became established in 1632 when Yakutsk city was founded. This city has become a base for the exploration and settlement of the Far East. In 1643, Russians explored Sakhalin Island, and in the 18th and 19th centuries, Kamchatka, the Kuril Islands, and other regions were explored and developed. Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky became one of the sites of military operations during the Crimean War, and it was known this was Russian land and we would always defend it. During World War II, the region was one of the flashpoints, a factor in restraining militaristic Japan, and one of the centers of industry, whose output was directed towards the military needs of the Soviet people. In 1945, the Far East became a key battleground where World War II ended. Let's join volunteers of victory on a journey that will give you an idea of how the bloodiest war in human history ended. The first clashes between Soviet and Japanese soldiers took place in 1938-1939 on Lake Khasan and Khalkhin River. Japan's attempt to violate the territorial integrity of the Soviet Union and Mongolia ended in defeat. In response to the provocations, the USSR created the Far Eastern Front and in 1941 created the Trans-Baikal Front as a necessity to defend against Japanese aggression. At the Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam conferences, the leaders of USSR, the US, and the UK discussed all-important political changes in the post-war world order. As for Japan, after Germany's defeat no later than 3 months after the Nazis' surrender, the USSR promised to enter the war against it. Stalin understood the importance of this promise, which included several factors significant for the country. First, no one would ever be able to take away the USSR's victorious role over Germany and its corresponding role as a victorious country of the international stage, which meant that it was necessary not only to provide assistance in the war against Japan, but also to clearly demonstrate the power and strength of the Red Army and become the state that won World War II as a whole. Secondly, it was necessary to return the lost Russian territories, South Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands. Thirdly, the status of a victorious country allowed it to exert significant influence on the world order. After the defeat of Nazi Germany, Japan's surrender was only a matter of time. On the 5th of April 1945, the Soviet Union, in accordance with international law, terminated its neutrality pact with Japan. There were plenty of reasons for this. Japan, in violation of the pact, was conducting subversive activities against the USSR, passing information to Berlin about the economic and military potential of the Far East, Siberia, and the Urals, staging provocation of borders and obstructing shipping in neutral and Soviet territorial waters. Japan also supplied Nazi Germany with lithium and other valuable materials for military equipment. Finally, in accordance with the Kentucky Plan, it moved Kuomintang Army to the borders to the Soviet Union. This forced the Soviet leadership to keep a troop contingent of over 1 million men in the Far East throughout 1941 till 1945. But it was Japan's turn to answer for its crimes, following Nazi Germany. After the defeat of the Nazi Germany, preparation for war with Japan began. As early as May 1945, the first echelons of Red Army troops were sent to the Far East, and by the beginning of August, 1,700,500 personnel had been concentrated there, opposed by 1,178,400 soldiers of Japanese army. Long and thorough preparations for war with Japan made it possible to minimize Soviet casualties. It is also important to know that command was entrusted to experienced and talented military leaders. By the 1st of August 1945, all the main preparations had been completed and the troops were awaiting orders on the date of the offensive. According to the plan, 3 offensive operations were to be carried out: Manchurian, South Sakhalin and Kuril landing operations, which were brilliantly executed. The Japanese command prepared for defensive operations, creating 17 fortified areas and more than 8,000 permanent firing positions along the front line stretching over 1,000 kilometers in Manchuria. The plan was for the Japanese to hold back the well-armed and trained Soviet troops for a year in order to negotiate more acceptable terms of the surrender and possibly conclude a peace agreement. But their plans were not to be. On the 8th of August 1945, Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov received Japanese Ambassador Naotaki Sato and told him that starting on the 9th of August, the Soviet Union would consider itself at war with Japan.
On the 8th of August 1945, we were roused by an alarm and forming a marching column, we set off along the road. At the end of the road, we entered an oak forest and, maneuvering between the oak trees, approached a gentle slope behind which lay a marshy lowland, which, as we later learned, was the border with Manchuria. We picked out areas free of trees, dug full profile firing positions, and covered the trenches with niches for shells with 3 layers of oak branches. At 10 o'clock in the evening, we were lined up and read a combat order stating that the Japanese, fighting against our grandfathers, had used various illegal methods of warfare, and that the time had come for us to settle accounts with them for all their atrocities and crimes. After that, we drove out to a large valley located between 2 rocks and covered with dry sand, stopped, were given gas masks which we immediately threw away, and put 2 pineapples, 1 anti-tank grenade in our bags. After dinner, we laid down on the sand and looked at the starry sky. It was our last peaceful rest. At 1 o'clock in the morning on 9th of August 1945, we set off across the swamp on a 4-row oak plank road. A thunderstorm broke out with heavy rain, and after the bright flashes of lightning, it was impossible to see anything. Our platoon fell slightly behind, so I went ahead, feeling the ground with my hands to avoid falling into the swamp. We were accompanied by the commander of the 102nd Light Artillery Regiment of the 105th Rifle Division, although we had already been assigned to the 41st Western Regiment, which had been transferred to the Far East after the end of the war with Germany. The regiment commander encouraged us, saying that the rain during the crossing of the border was a sign of good luck.
The Manchurian strategic offensive operation unfolded along a front stretching over 5,000 kilometers. The Japanese army was attacked from land, air, and sea. Within the first few days, the defense line was breached in various places. The Kwantung Army, the most combat-ready group of Japanese troops, was defeated in 23 days of fighting, which was Japan's biggest defeat in the entire Second World War and its greatest loss. It was not possible to defend for a year. The bravery and courage of the Soviet soldiers thwarted all the plans of militaristic Japan. The offensive against the Japanese troops was prepared as a strategic operation involving three fronts: the Navy and the Air Force, which were to divide, encircle, and destroy the Manchurian Japanese group with 3 cotton strikes. The rapid advance of Soviet and Japanese troops put the Japanese army in a very difficult position. From 9th to 20th of August, the Red Army advanced 400 to 800 kilometers into Manchuria, conducting an offensive in difficult geographical and climatic conditions, but advancing relentlessly. By the 18th of August, units of the Mongolian People's Revolutionary Army had cut off the Manchurian group from expeditionary forces of the Japanese troops of China. By the 19th of August, the troops of Trans-Baikal Front had crossed the arid steppes and the Gobi Desert and defeated large enemy forces.
From the Memoirs of Guard Captain Dmitry Loza. Suddenly, the command air was heard. The cruise gun commanders rushed to the anti-aircraft machine guns, which had been covered and set up in a marching position for many days, since enemy aircraft had not bothered us until that moment. 6 rapidly approaching fighter bombers appeared on the horizon. The attack developed so rapidly that the crew did not even have time to prepare the machine guns for firing. The first aircraft flew at low altitude towards the battalion's lead tank and crashed into its front at full speed. Pieces of the fuselage flew in all directions. The mangled engine collapsed under the tracks. Flames danced on the Sherman's hull. The impact concussed the driver guard Sergeant Nikolai Zuev. The paratroopers from the first 3 tanks rushed to a brick building to take cover. The second Japanese pilot directed his plane at this building, but after breaking through the roof, it got stuck in the attic. None of our soldiers were injured. It immediately became clear that the battalion was under attack by kamikaze pilots. The third pilot did not repeat his comrade's mistake. He descended sharply and directed the aircraft towards the windows of the building, but failed to reach his target. After hitting a telegraph pole with its wing, the fighter bomber crashed to the ground and immediately burst into flames. The fourth aircraft, diving towards the column, crashed into the battalion's medical center vehicle, which caught fire. The last 2 suicide bombers targeted the rear tanks, but met with heavy anti-aircraft fire. Both aircraft crashed into the water near the railway tracks. The air attack lasted only a few short minutes. 6 fighter bombers were reduced to shapeless piles of metal. 6 pilots were killed, and to our great surprise, there were girls in the cockpits of 2 of the planes besides the pilots. In all likelihood, they were the brides of the suicide bombers who had decided to share their chosen one's sad fate. The damage from the attack was insignificant. A car burned down, the turret of the lead Sherman jammed, and the driver mechanic was out of action. The car was quickly removed from the embankment, the assistant driver mechanic took the controls of the MJ, and the march continued.
The Soviet Union's entry into the war against Japan was a decisive factor in the defeat of the Land of the Rising Sun, and it forced it to announce the surrender of Japanese troops to the Soviets on the 15th of August 1945. However, troops on Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands received secret orders to fight to the end in order to negotiate more favorable terms of surrender, and perhaps even to try to retain these territories. This rapid, victorious advance made it possible to launch the South Sakhalin offensive on 11th of August 1945. The difficulty of conducting combat operations lay in the fact that they were carried out in rough terrain, wooded and mountainous areas. In addition, the Soviet command headquarters didn't have accurate information about the defense system and the number of Japanese troops. The Japanese prepared thoroughly for the defense. The Khotan fortified area blocked the only convenient land route to South Sakhalin and included 30 kilometers of virtually impassable terrain. A frontal attack of the fortifications was difficult, but our troops advanced regardless, with artillerymen demonstrating miracles of heroism in the sector, firing directly at enemy fortifications from the ranks of the advancing infantry. On the 16th of August, a Soviet landing force was dropped behind Japanese lines in the port of Shakhtarsk, and by the 18th of August, the defense had been broken through with counterattacks, and Japanese troops began to surrender en masse. A Red Army Marine landing force was landed on 20th of August in the port of Komsk and on the 25th of August in the port of Korsakov, which led to the complete defeat of the Japanese on Sakhalin. On the 25th of August 1945, the 56th Rifle Corps, in cooperation with the landing forces, liberated the main city of this island, Toyohara, known in Russian as Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, and Sakhalin was liberated.
It was the 20th of August. The landing ships of the Northern Pacific Fleet, the Mine Layer Ocean, the patrol ship Tsarnitsa, torpedo boats and border patrol boats, merchant navy transports approached the Maoko roadstead at dawn. The coast was shrouded in thick fog. I was a helmsman and signalman on a torpedo boat. I participated in the landing operation as part of a combined marine battalion, together with my comrades on the Tsarnitsa in a division that the sailors jokingly called the Bad Weather Division. It also included patrol ships with weather names: Snowstorm, Blizzard, and Lightning. At dawn, each of us recalled the rally that took place in Soviet harbor the day before the ships left for the operation. At the rally, we swore to liberate the ancient Russian lands and were determined to fulfill our duty. And so, the first two combined detachments of sailors and marines under the command of Major Golchak and Captain Koprenko rushed to the shore in boats. The first group of troops landed at a correction post consisting of senior sailor Danilin, radio operator Buyanov, and electrical communications operator Roba. I was ordered to command the post. We maintained contact with the ships in the roadstead and with Captain Koprenko advancing detachment. According to the plan, the landing was bold and unexpected for the Japanese. They only opened fire when the first echelon had taken control of the piers and port facilities. Meanwhile, our small ships were landing troops on the piers. The post immediately detected the enemy's firing points. Radio operator Buyanov immediately transmitted the data to the ships. Our artillery opened fire. Correction was complicated by poor visibility. Nevertheless, the counterattack of 150mm naval guns suppressed some of the enemy's batteries and pillboxes, facilitating the landing forces' advance. Soon the sailors from the post joined Captain Koprenko company. Our units had to first capture the post office, telegraph office, police headquarters and industrial enterprises. The Japanese tried to throw the landing force back into the sea, but minesweepers and transports were moored in the port, and new units and equipment were entering the battle. The Marines, building on their success, liberated street after street. Soon Maoko was in our hands. Seeing the futility of resistance, the Japanese set fire to the city in several places and retreated deeper in the island. I still have photographs from those years. In one of these pictures, Japanese women and old people returned to the city with their belongings. They met Soviet soldiers on the street and talked with them. The Japanese had friendly smiles on their faces. Many of them already understood the humanism of the Soviet people, which was even more noticeable against the backdrop of the despicable actions of the fascist samurai. Soviet troops put out fires, restored order in the city, and helped the population. The reactionary Japanese soldiers were still not pacified. Many of them remained disguised in civilian clothes. They fired more than one bullet at our soldiers from around the corner. Burning of residential areas continued. Large areas were burned down. There were acts of sabotage of a different nature. For example, Japanese saboteurs repeatedly poisoned drinking water in water towers. The senselessness of these acts is obvious. First and foremost, it was the peaceful Japanese residents who suffered the most. On the 22nd of August, our ships left Maoka. After liberating Nevelsk, Gornozavodsk and Manaron, on the 25th of August, the ships moored in the port of Korsakov. Garrison surrendered and the city greeted us with white flags. Japanese people with white armbands crowded the quays. They helped us moor. It was 6 in the morning, and by 10 o'clock the sailors had joined forces with the troops of the Second Far Eastern Front. Southern Sakhalin was completely liberated. In Korsakov, the situation was the same as in Homsk. Fires broke out. Having damaged the houses in advance, the samurai set fire to the food warehouses. One day, our chemist discovered that poisons had been added to the storage facility. Only timely measures saved the peaceful Japanese people from casualties. 2 weeks later, life returned to normal. Many Japanese, when they were repatriated to their homeland, said, "How are we going to live? We have no money, only our hands. You have enough, but there is a little there." Soon I was demobilized and came to Homsk. 30 years have passed since then, but those distant days of 1945 will remain in my memory forever.
Rapid advances in Manchuria, Korea and Sakhalin made it possible to launch the Kuril Islands landing operations on the 18th of August 1945, the final operation of World War II. The Japanese began fortifying Shumshu, the Kuril island closest to Kamchatka, in 1943, hoping to use it as a springboard for an offensive, creating the well-equipped and well-armed naval base of Katoka. For this purpose, on the 17th of August, a squadron with troops under cover of fighter planes and a submarine left Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky and reached Shumshu Island in the early morning of the 18th of August. The advanced landing force began landing at 4:22 a.m., but immediately encountered a problem. The fog that had helped them approach the island unnoticed complicated the landing, and the seabed proved unsuitable for ships to approach the shore. With the ocean, surf and enemy fire, our valiant soldiers landed 100 meters from the shore with heavy weapons on their shoulders. But the early morning, the fog and the chosen landing zone provided the element of surprise and allowed the Soviet soldiers to gain a foothold on the shore. Until the 22nd of August, fighting continued on the island. Our troops encountered enemy tanks, stormed firing positions, and advanced under enormous pressure from the enemy. The battles from Shumshu Island were bloodiest of the entire Soviet-Japanese War of 1945. And our ancestors honorably fulfilled their duty, liberating their land from the invaders. The fighting on Shumshu was the last for the Red Army. All other garrisons of the Kuril Island surrendered without a fight, and some managed to evacuate to Japan. So, when our soldiers landed, they saw empty lands.
The commander of the Marine Assault Company, Senior Lieutenant Ivan Koshay, came down from the upper deck from the forecastle to give his subordinates their combat mission. We have a task ahead of us to liberate the ancient Russian lands captured by the Japanese military. We are the first to march on the formidable, heavily fortified Kuril Islands in order to secure a foothold for the main landing forces. I am confident that everyone will honorably fulfill the duty of the motherland. First Sergeant Nikolai Vilkov rose from his seat. He was a man of few words. We are facing a fierce battle with a treacherous enemy. As for myself, I will say this. I was raised by Lenin's party and I will justify its trust in me, no matter what obstacles stand in my way. And so, at dawn on the 18th August 1945, under cover of a thick fog, landing ships approached the steep, rocky island of Shumshu. Marines with machine guns in their hands jumped into the water and immediately captured the enemy's first line of defense. The Japanese did not expect such a rapid onslaught, but they soon recovered and opened heavy fire with all types of weapons. The Marines stubbornly advanced. An order was given to take height number 171, which dominated the area. It was the command post of the Japanese troops, 8,500 of whom were entrenched on this island alone. In the middle of the day, tanks rushed at the brave men, but they were met with accurate shots from anti-tank guns and grenades. The enemy lost 15 armored vehicles and more than 100 soldiers. In the midst of attack, a two-barreled pillbox came to life. Trails of fire pinned the Pacific troops to the hill. They had to lie down. Every minute took someone's young life. Rising up, Vilkov threw a grenade. The explosion merged with another. Ilyichov struck the second machine gun, which was showering the ground with red-hot lead. The shooting stopped, but not for long. Then the fearless sailors stood up to their full height and stepped towards the fire-breathing embrasures. The ensuing silence was broken to cries of "Hurrah!" After the decisive assault, the naval flag, which Nikolai Vilkov, boatswain of the floating base North, had brought with him on the daring landing, was raised victoriously. The victory came at a high price. Many participants in the operation died here a brave death. For this feat, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR posthumously awarded Nikolai Vilkov and Pyotr Ilyichov the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. Their names are forever inscribed in the lists of crew of the Red Banner Pacific Fleet ships. Military ships passing by the Kuril island of Shumshu lower their flags each time to pay tribute to the memory of the faithful sons of the fatherland. The poet Gavril Derzhavin was right when he said, "The glory of those who die for their fatherland never dies."
During the years of Japanese occupation of the Far East, there were numerous cases of crimes against humanity. The horrific experiments conducted on humans by Unit 731 under the leadership of Lieutenant General Shiro Ishii shocked the entire world. But few people know that not far from the Chinese city of Harbin, there was a concentration camp called Hogoin, translated from Japanese as shelter, which was intended for Soviet prisoners of war and civilians. This camp has also held Soviet prisoners of war who have been missing since the battles of Khasan Lake in 1938 and the Halkangul River in 1939, when our valiant defenders defeated the Japanese troops on the border. During World War II, several thousand Soviet citizens ended up in Japanese camps. In Hogoin, designed for 150 people, prisoners were tortured to extract information about the military and economic capabilities of the Soviet Union and the political situation in the country, but in most cases, even under torture, the Soviet people refused to cooperate. Deputy concentration camp commander Kenji Yamagashi recalled during preparations for the Khabarovsk trial of Japanese criminals, Soviet Army soldier Demchenko categorically refused to provide any information about the Soviet Union. With my permission, physical force was used against him, and Estivagation tortured him by hanging him by his arms and legs from a beam. Demchenko still refused to testify, so I decided to physically destroy him and send him to Unit 731 for that purpose. And this is not an isolated case where, showing miracles of courage and fearlessness in the face of death, our compatriots refused to compromise. Unfortunately, everyone who was sent from the concentration camp to Unit 731 perished. The remaining prisoners of Hogoin were shot after Japan's surrender was announced in August 1945.
According to Iosio Edima, who headed the Hogoin from February to August 1945, it contained only Russian people, exclusively men. Edima personally sent about 40 people to certain death in Unit 731. He left 4 others, an artist named Smirnov, a priest, an agronomist and a sailor behind because they had skills that were needed in the camp. After the Kwantung army surrendered, they were shot, Idzima said during interrogations in 1948. He also ordered the lethal injection of a Russian woman named Lisa, who had been admitted to Hogoin as an exception. When the prisoner was hospitalized with appendicitis, she was killed according to instructions. Deputy head of Hogoin, Kenji Yamagisi, stated during interrogations that the purpose of the concentration camp was to process Soviet military personnel in the Japanese direction and obtain from them as much information as possible about the structure, strength, combat, readiness and deployment of Soviet army units, the economic and political situation of the Soviet Union, as well as other intelligence data. All kinds of torture were used on Soviet citizens during interrogations. Those who refused to cooperate were exterminated in the 731st Chemical Sabotage Unit, where the effects of deadly bacteria on the human body were studied.
Unfortunately, not all criminals were punished, but the Khabarovsk and Tokyo trials punished many. The Tokyo trial tried military and civilian representatives of militaristic Japan. At the Khabarovsk trial, Japanese war criminals were charged with creating special units in the Kwantung army that were engaged in the development of biological weapons, in particular the cultivation of plague bacteria, cholera, anthrax, and other serious diseases, and conducting experiments on humans, including Soviet prisoners of war. The crimes of the Japanese in World War II must not be forgotten. We must remember them in order to prevent the distortion of history and to ensure that the horrors of war are never repeated. World War II was the bloodiest war in human history. Our ancestors paid a huge price for the victory. The victory over militaristic Japan was the final stage in the global confrontation of 1939 till 1945. On the 2nd of September 1945, the Act of Surrender of Japan was signed on the American battleship Missouri. Lieutenant General Kuzma Derivanenko signed it on the behalf of the Soviet Union. More than 90 people were awarded the title of Hero on the Soviet Union for their participation in the Soviet-Japanese War on the 1945, and more than 1,800,000 soldiers and officers of the Red Army were awarded the Medal for Victory over Japan. In 1945, the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet of the USSR adopted a decree declaring 3rd September a holiday celebrating victory over Japan. In accordance with the federal law of 13 of March 1995, on days of military glory and memorable dates in Russia, as amended in 2020, this day is declared the Day of Military Glory of Russia. The final solemn code for our country in World War II can be considered the Victory Parade in Harbin on the 16th of September 1945, when our liberating soldiers proudly marched in formation through the streets of the Chinese city, immortalizing the heroism and courage of the Soviet people. In addition to Northeast China, our troops also liberated the territory of North Korea, which later served as a guarantee of strong friendship. Incidentally, it was only on the 19th of October 1956 that a declaration was signed in Moscow between the USSR and Japan to end the state of war. But a peace treaty was never concluded, an interesting diplomatic and legal subtlety that largely explains the complex relations between the two countries to this day. For decades, Japan has been calling for the return of so-called Northern Territories, the islands of Eitrup, Kunashi, Shikotan, and the Habamai Group. But the recently adopted new version of the Russian constitution contains a direct ban on the alienation of Russian territories, and the Kuril Islands, watered with the blood of our soldiers and sailors in 1945, are nothing else. World War II claimed more than 70 million lives on the planet. 62 of the 74 states existing at the time took part in it, and fighting took place on the territory of 40 countries. The scale of the military conflict was simply staggering. It affected territories in Europe, Asia, and Africa, with combat operations taking place in the Atlantic, Pacific, Indian, and Arctic Oceans. But the Soviet people were tempered in the struggle against Nazi Germany and militaristic Japan. One of the most combat-ready armies in the world was created our state, being one of the superpowers, and geopolitical issues could not be resolved without the participation of the USSR. We managed to regain the territories lost at the beginning of the 20th century and create enormous potential for economic and industrial development. Volunteers of victory preserve the memory of the past. Our goal is to ensure that those events are not forgotten and the memory of the heroes is not lost, to remember and pass on the true history to future generations. Memory is our great asset, and the past is our best teacher. Now we will test how closely you follow the video tour. Those who complete the tasks first and answer all the questions correctly will receive unique prizes. A short online quiz to test your knowledge and attention is ahead. Each of the 5 questions is directly related to what you heard and saw today, and some of the answers maybe were hidden right in the broadcast. From my own experience, I can say that it is more convenient to play from different devices. If you can watch the broadcast on your laptop and enter your answers on your mobile phone, or vice versa, that's the best option, so nothing will go wrong. Before the start, make sure you have a good internet connection, the broadcast is not lagging, and you are watching it live. Please find your ID from the website volonteropobieda.rf so that we don't confuse your answers with someone else's. How to find it? Go to the website when you registered for the event volonteropobieda.rf. Click on the personal account button. It is here, on the right side of the page. Write it down so you don't forget. We will give you 1 minute to do it. So, we are ready to start. The questions will appear here, in the broadcast, and the answers might be entered into the form for collecting answers. Follow the QR code that you see at the screen of the link in the pinned comment to the broadcast. Let's start the game. When did the Russian travelers start to explore the Far East? In 1632, in 1643, in 1724. What is the name of the island closest to Kamchatka in the northern group of the Kuril Islands? Paramushi, Shumshu, Kunashi. Which Soviet military commander was the commander-in-chief in the Far East against militaristic Japan? Alexander Vasilevsky, Kirill Meretskov, Rodion Malinovsky. Which city on Sakhalin Island did the Red Army land in for the last time in August in 1945? Shakhtarsk, Khomsk, Kosakov. Which countries in Asia were liberated from Japanese occupation by Red Army soldiers? China and Korea, Laos and Korea, Vietnam and Thailand. That was the last question. You will have 30 seconds to enter the correct answer and submit the Yandex form, after which no answer will be accepted. Time is up. It's time to find out the correct answers and check yourself. The answer to the first question was 1632. That was then Yakutsk was founded, marking the beginning of the exploration of the Far Eastern Siberia. 7 years after the city was founded, Ivan Moskvitin's detachment, a Russian exploring Cossack ataman from Tomsk, reached the coast of the Okhotsk Sea. The correct answer to the second question is Shumshu. The island is separated from Kamchatka by a strait and is located 11 kilometers from the mainland. In 1711, the island was visited by an expedition led by Yakut Cossack Ivan Kozyrevsky. From 1749 to 1785, there was a bilingual Russian-Ain school on Shumshun. In 1945, following the end of World War II, the island came under the jurisdiction of the USSR. On the 2nd of February 1946, it was incorporated into the South Sakhalin district. The third question was about Alexander Mikhailovich Vasilievsky. For his skillful command of the combined Soviet forces in the Far East against the Japanese troops, he was repeatedly awarded the title of the Soviet Union Hero. The fourth question concerns Kosachev. On the 25th of August 1945, a Soviet landing force of 1,600 men landed in the port city. The garrison of 3,400 Japanese soldiers, realizing the futility of resistance, surrendered. And the answer to the fifth question: during the Manchurian strategic operation, Soviet troops liberated the territories of northern China and North Korea. These countries honor the memory of the Red Army soldiers who gave them freedom. More than 500 monuments and burial sites are located on their territory and are well maintained. Thank you for participating in quiz. In a week, we will publish the rankings of participants and list of winners who answered correctly the fastest. 10 of you will receive prizes. Stay tuned for updates. Remember the price that was paid for victory in World War II and cherish the memory of the heroes of our fatherland.